Now, personally, I'm a high school graduate, so I would say that I probably have a 10,000 word vocabulary. And you can tell by some of my four-letter euphemisms that I picked up from President Nixon in the Watergate tapes, that I lack a lot of adjectives that I need to describe what it is I want to say. And so therefore you can tell by my speech that I probably do not have 20,000 words in my vocabulary. But I have studied a lot of words, and I am fairly knowledgeable in words, so I'm going to give myself the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to say I'm just as knowledgeable as any college graduate, and I've got 20,000 words in my vocabulary. Would you take a calculator out and take 20,000 and divide it by 400,000, and isn't that about 5%? I think that's about 5%. I can lay claim to knowing and understanding and using 5% of the English language, and this judge says, do you understand the English language? No, I don't. I have a rudimentary understanding of 5% of the English language, and if you were to ask me, well, of the 20,000 words that you claim to know, do you know and understand the definitions and meanings and the euphemisms that are attendant to all of those 20,000 words? And I'd have to say, no, I don't. You know, every day that goes by, somebody will ask me something. Some guy came in today and he said, do you understand the syntax of a sentence? Syntax. Well, is that the tax on beer and cigarette? Why don't you look up the word syntax and find out what that is? I don't know myself. I think it had something to do with the construction of a sentence. The difference between sentence structure in 1867 and 1967. Now here we are in the courtroom, and this guy says, well, now do you read and write the English language? Well, if I can't speak it, I surely can't read and write what I can't speak. So I'd have to say, well, 5% of it. And if you're just a high school graduate, it's 2.5%, isn't it? And what if you're not a high school graduate? Or what if you are and you've been to the government school and your vocabulary is down around 6,000 words? Well, maybe it's only 1.5% or 1.25% of the English language that you know and understand. Now let me show you how damaging that is to you. Before it was my turn for arraignment, there was a young lady. She was charged with a felony. She was charged with writing a check for $209 at the Kmart store. And she went in there and she wanted to plead guilty. And she had a lawyer there to help her plead. And he was sitting there and the prosecutor was sitting over there. And the judge said, do you understand the charges against you? And she said, yes. Now I've got to ask you a few questions. And so he had her stand up and she was sworn in. And she sat down and he said, is your name Jane Doe? Yes. And Jane, how old are you? Well, she's 26. And Jane, on or about March 10th, 1983, did you enter the Kmart store? Yes. And did you write a check that day? Yes. And was the amount $209? And yes. And was it drawn on the Bank of Idaho? And yes. And at the time you wrote that check, did you know that there was not sufficient funds or credit to cover the check? No. Stop the proceeding. The poor woman wasn't even coached in how to plead guilty and get it right. The judge stopped. Hold it. Don't you understand? You see what happened? The poor lady walks in there. She writes a check for $209 and the check bounces. You've got to have intent. Our contract with our government contends that you've got to have intent to convict somebody. She's being prosecuted by information. She's giving the government permission to prosecute her. And she fouls up on the pleadings. And so her lawyer, boy, it's a good thing she had her lawyer there. And her lawyer said, well, Your Honor, the state can show that the bank had sent her 5 or 6 notices that the account was overdrawn. And since the state can prove that the account was overdrawn, why, I don't think intent, Your Honor, is a requirement of the state's prima facie case. Well, young lady, do you waive the issue of intent? Yes. Okay. So, let's go on. Now, did you write any other checks? Yes. And how many other checks did you write? I don't know. Well, the information says that you wrote a total of 7 checks. Did you write a total of 7 checks? Yes. And did you write these other checks at Kmart? No. You wrote these other checks at other businesses? Yes. And when you wrote these checks at other businesses, did you buy merchandise? Yes. Was the check for the purchase of merchandise? Yes. Did you do so with the intent to defraud the merchants of their property? No. Hold it! Wait a minute! Let's get this woman coached on, the judge didn't say that, but it just stopped the proceedings. And so this lady, fortunately she had a lawyer there. And her lawyer said, well, Your Honor, I think that the intent of the defendant was to defraud, and the intent was to take merchandise with checks with which she knew she didn't have sufficient funds, and therefore I think that the issue of intent is waived in those 6 checks also. And I believe that she was, here's her lawyer, I believe that, and I think, and maybe if all the facts are in, it could well be, and we're not sure, but we theorize, and the hypothesis tells us that it could well be that she's probably guilty because she has been coached. And so the judge is sitting up there going, oh, well, okay, now, here's what I'm going to do, young lady. I am going to accept your guilty plea upon the condition that you answer this question. Do you understand that all of the checks that you wrote were written maliciously and with intent to defraud, and that you did it for the purpose of felony grand theft? And she didn't understand that wording in that statement, and she looked at her lawyer, who went, yes. Fortunately for that young lady, a prosecutor and a lawyer and her ignorance combined gave the government enough permission to put her in the penitentiary. She wasn't smart enough to put herself in the penitentiary. And I'm sitting there, I was almost in tears. I could not believe what I was watching in this courtroom. It was obvious, and the testimony showed that she had recently been divorced. Her children have been taken away from her. She's under a great deal of mental stress. And she wrote some bad checks. I've written some bad checks in my day. And I've gotten notices from the bank, and, you try to go down and do something about them. You tell them, well, I don't have any money, sorry, I'll bring you back the goods. Well, I don't know what the details were for this lady, but it was pretty obvious that she wasn't a criminal because she didn't have any criminal intent. It looks like to me that she couldn't add and subtract. And that she got to a point that she was distraught and didn't care whether she could add or subtract. And I'm not here to justify people writing bad checks. I'm just here telling you that here was a lady that couldn't have gone to jail if she hadn't had a lawyer. Her lawyer had to help her to jail. All right, now, on this Bouvier's Law Dictionary, I contend that it's absolutely necessary and imperative for you to have it. And the reason for this, or the Bouvier Law Dictionary, is this. I'm not saying that you have to buy it from me. I'm saying that you need one. And if it's not the 1870 model, then see if you can get the 1914 model. The intent of the lawmaker is the law. The intent and the construction of the wording of the contract is the law. The word hate 300 years ago meant to love less. Today the word hate means to despise to the point of malice. There's a difference then in the word hate as it appears in 300 or 400-year-old texts and the word hate today as it's used in the vernacular on the streets. Now let me illustrate that point for you. I went to a deposition this morning, and this man went into the deposition, and at 9 o'clock in the morning he went in with an envelope, one of these file folders. And in the file folder he had some papers just like this, legal papers. No. Just like you've gotten several of these course outlines. And he had some letters in there and some other items. And the opposing attorney, now this is a civil case, now the opposing attorney is sitting there and he wants to pump and get all the information that he can get. And so I happened to be there as a witness, and he asked me to go there as his next friend. And of course I'm there not to represent him, but just to act as his next friend. And well, what do you think, George? And well, how would you answer that? And there was another fellow there, and he was also acting as a witness and counsel. And this goes on like this. Well, Mr. Merrill, have you brought the documents that are specified in the summons? And Mr. Merrill said, no. No, I haven't brought the documents because I don't have any documents. I don't keep any records. I'm a free man. And it's for that reason that I consider that Hale versus Hinkle and my Fourth Amendment rights come into play. Well, then you admit then that you didn't bring the documents. Yes, no, I didn't bring the documents. Well, the conversation broke down rapidly, as most conversations do when you start talking about rights and Hale versus Hinkle and Brushaber and Stone Tracy. And when you start bringing up the Constitution and the Supreme Court of the United States and the master contract, these lawyers, they don't want to talk to you anymore. They get real nervous. I call them a den of vipers. And this fellow wanted to go into this den of vipers with a couple of mongooses with him because he was a little nervous. And this fellow said, well, are you going to bring the papers and are you going to testify at the deposition? And he said, well, no, I don't think I'm going to bring any papers because I don't have any. Now we came in at 10:30 to the deposition. And this lawyer, you know, he just come unglued. He said, now you gentlemen will have to stay outside. You cannot come in here with Mr. Merrill. Mr. Merrill says, well, why is that? Well, because we want the answers from you, and it'll tend to disrupt if you have these unlicensed counselors in here. Well, let me ask you this, says Merrill. If I had a licensed lawyer, could he come in and advise me? Well, yeah, if he was licensed in the state of Idaho and he could practice law at the federal level, yes, he could come in. But these people aren't, and they're just laymen. They can't come in. Take a look here at legal quotations, number 203, 4, 5, and 210, 11, 12, and 13, 374. Take a look at the counsel issue. Now, here's this guy denying this man counsel. So, we just kind of ignored him, and 10:30 came, we just walked in, and we all sat down, like, now what do we want to do? We're here, you going to throw us out or what? And gets to be fun. Gosh, I love these IRS hearings. I'm telling you, if you're not having a ball at these IRS hearings, well, you're just not handling it right. And this deposition just absolutely hilarious. And we sit down, and this guy tries to act real calm, cool, and collected, and he's paid this young lady to come in, and she's called a court reporter, and she's going to take testimony. And Orson, you know, he's just kind of a down-to-earth kind of a guy. And he says, now, let the record show that in the room with me is the court reporter and myself and Mr. Merrill. And Mr. Merrill has two unidentified gentlemen in the room. And would you gentlemen identify yourself? And I said, yeah, my name's George Gordon, and I'm here live and direct. And this other guy says, yeah, my name's Neelis Cook, and I'm here live and direct. And we're just kind of sitting there, taking volume, fat and dumb. Mr. Merrill, at this time, will administer the oath. Oath? What do you mean, oath? Well, you'll have to be sworn. Sworn? Why? Why would I want to be sworn? Well, we can't take a deposition, you see, unless you're sworn. It's pursuant to the rules. What rules? The rules of federal civil procedure demand and require that you be sworn, or affirm, whichever you prefer. Oh, whichever I prefer neither. If you're not sworn, this deposition will terminate. Oh. Well, gosh, does that mean we can't go on with the deposition if I'm not going to take this oath? Well, yes, of course. Oh, okay. Well, will you raise your right hand? No. Well, why won't you take the oath? Because I have religious beliefs, and I don't think a man ought to take an oath. I think that it's a violation of Matthew 5:37 and James 5:12. This poor lawyer is sitting on the other side of the table, you know, he just, I can't believe this. Can't be. And here's this crusty old guy, he's just sitting over there kind of fat and dumb, having a good time. Well, if you could cite some authority for this, maybe I could understand it. He said, "What's wrong with God? Isn't he a good enough authority?" But this isn't pursuant to the rules of federal civil procedure, Mr. Merrill, and we've got to do this by the rules of procedure. Well, I haven't been known as a liar, but most people believe what I tell them. If you'll ask me the question, I'll tell you the answer, and if I'm lying to you, well, I'll just be subject to the penalties of perjury. Oh no, my poor lawyer, you know, he just beside himself. He just couldn't figure this out at all. How many people have you ever seen in the courtroom who would say, "No, I'm not going to take the oath"? You ever seen that happen before? Well, I don't know whether or not you should or shouldn't do that. And I'm not telling people that they shouldn't raise their hands and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. But what I wanted to illustrate to you was that, like language, when I go into the courtroom, friends, and somebody asks me the question, "Do you read and write the English language?" No. You mean you're illiterate? Just about. I would contend that anybody who only knows 2.5% of a subject is just about has no knowledge. I think I probably have just about as much knowledge about nuclear fission and building an atomic bomb as I do about the English language. I might know 2.5% of nuclear fission. I might even, know even less than that. Now, as I've said, when you go into that courtroom and somebody asks you if you're going to swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, or they're going to ask you, do you understand the English language? Those are admissions and confessions. And the next thing I'm going to ask is, who in the hell are you to even ask me that? Just who are you that you would have the audacity to ask the sovereign, the citizen, the man who is directly below God, if he is going to swear an oath or if he knows and understands the English language for the purpose of finding out or getting him, not finding out, but getting him to make this admission so that later when they prosecute you by information, well, out of your own mouth you said you knew and understood the English language. You see, this thing of power is something a little bit more than what we're talking about when Charles Louis his name is Secondant, the Frenchman, I believe it was, wrote his treatise in 1732 or 1748 about the separation of powers as a doctrine of government. Let me go on to illustrate it. another important fact here in this subject matter of language in Scripture. Have you noticed in the courtroom that some little girl will stand up, at least they do in our courtrooms over here, and they'll say, well, will you raise your right hand? And you kind of look around like this. I think these are strange customs. Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Do you see anything wrong with that? Well, first of all, let's go to the last word. Why is God in the courtroom? What's he doing there? I thought we had separation of church and state. Why are we asking God to ratify this particular oath or this contract? Who's going to subpoena God into the courtroom if there's a violation of the terms and conditions of the contract? Nobody that I know of. What is truth? Do you swear to tell the truth? Well, I looked in the Bible here the other day, and I don't want you to think now that I'm a preacher and I'm out here thumping the Bible. I am not a Christian. Okay, that's a wild statement. Most people tell you they are Christians. I'm not. I've told you a couple lessons ago that I wasn't a prophet. I thought I was a prophet in 1968, and I made 3 prophecies, and all 3 of them failed, and then I looked here in the Bible, and I found out why. See, if a prophet makes a prophecy and it doesn't come to pass, that's the evidence. That's your prima facie evidence that he's not a prophet. It's no different in the courtroom. So I flipped over, and you might just do this. If you look around your house, maybe you'll find an old Bible someplace. Some people carry these around yet. And I don't know much about Scripture, but I do remember one time looking in the Bible, and it's over here in a place called Matthew 5:33. Yeah, Matthew 5:33. Now, you're in a courtroom, of all places, and somebody says, raise your right hand. Why not raise your left foot, or scratch your left ear, or scratch under your arm as you're telling this oath? What on earth does raising your right hand have to do with whether or not you tell the truth? I don't know. Never could figure that out. And I've got servants. Talk about separation of powers here. Here's a servant telling the master to raise his right hand. How would you like to tell Jesus Christ, or God, to raise his right hand because you don't believe what he's about to tell you, and you want him to raise his right hand, scratch his left ear, and repeat after me? Doesn't that sound insane to you, or am I just out to lunch somewhere along the line? So we've got this custom. Some kind of a ceremony goes with this telling the truth thing. And it's administered by a servant, not a master. These people aren't superior to me. They're inferior. My Constitution tells me I made the contract. If anybody is going to administer an oath, it's going to be me, the master. And I'll administer the oath to the clerk and to the judge. Are you people going to carry out your duties here as I've commanded and ordered you to do under the Supremacy Clause of our federal Constitution, wherein it says that this Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land? That's the oath that ought to be administered, and I ought to be the one that's administering, and that's assuming that we were going to. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, to the contract. You're not going to bring me grass, dummy. You're going to bring me alfalfa. So here we are. We're in the courtroom. Do you swear to tell the truth? Do you swear? S-W-E-A-R. Matthew 5:33. Again, you've heard that it's been said by them of old time, you shall not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord, or unto the Eternal, thine oaths. Gosh. Matthew 5:33 says, well, you heard it in old time, you shall not forswear yourself. Gosh, I wonder what forswear yourself means. Let's read on. But I say unto you, swear not at all. And here's all these people. They come into these courtrooms. I swear to tell the truth. I swear this and I swear that. Now, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I don't know. All I know is that I don't do that. And he goes on to say, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king, neither shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black, but let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these comes of evil. I'm not telling you you should or shouldn't do that. I'm just telling you that the courts shouldn't compel you to swear. You know, if you've got First Amendment religious beliefs and you believe that the Bible ought to be obeyed and that you ought to obey God, that you wouldn't swear. Now there's another thing wrong with this oath. Do you swear to tell the truth? Pray tell, would you tell me what the truth is so that I might know? There was an old-timey political leader back in Christ's day. He asked that question, what is truth? It's a philosophical question. What is truth? If you say, well, what are the facts concerning this event, I could probably relate to you some facts. But you sit there and ask George Gordon what the truth is, and I just look at you and say, well, I don't know. I know what claim there is to truth. The scriptures say, thy word is truth. You wonder what that means. If the scripture says thy word is truth, I'd have to assume that this book then of God's word is probably the truth. Whether you believe that or not is for you. Now you're going to go on and say, the whole truth. Wow! What kind of an admission and confession are these people asking you to make? And just who are these people who are asking you to tell the whole truth? And guess what? It's under penalty of perjury, you see, because if you don't tell the whole truth, then you're guilty of a felony. That's an infamous crime. And now they're going to put you in the penitentiary for perjury. Did you want to put yourself in jeopardy of perjury? I don't. This lawyer not long ago, he looked at me and he asked 4 questions. He said, are you a pathological liar? Yeah, I am. You know what I tell people? And I'll tell you right now. Don't you believe a word I tell you. You can't believe but what I lied to you when I quoted you that scripture out of Matthew 5:33 through 37. Maybe I didn't quote it right. Maybe I lied. Maybe I deceived you. Why don't you check up? Why don't you go read it for yourself? And then when you get through, you can corroborate my testimony. You can say, yeah, that Gordon quoted that right, or he didn't quote it right. But at least you know that I didn't tell you to believe me because I told you so. I told you you believe me if you can see that it's proven. I don't tell you to believe me because I said so. You read it for yourself in the Supreme Court. I'm not telling you to believe this contract. I'm telling you, you go read this contract and see if whether or not what I'm telling you isn't true. If it isn't the correct facts. If it didn't really happen that way. If these people didn't really say that. Now the warning to you is, and boy, watch this, these words are powerful. You see, this courtroom drama is designed to entrap you by words and wording and phrases into making statements that aren't true, that you don't know whether they are true or aren't true, and then convict you. And they're going to ask you questions and words and phrases, and they'll pump and they'll pump and they'll pump, and you'll say yes and yes and yes, but you really mean no, no, no. Now let me show you what happened to Orson. We get up here now to this little meeting. It's called a deposition. And he begins to ask some questions. Mr. Merrill, do you have a file folder in front of you? Yes. And in that file folder, do you have some documents? Yes. And is that the same file folder that you had in my office with our conversation earlier this morning? Yes. Is that the conversation that you had with us at 9:30? Yes. And did you at that time refuse to furnish the documents required in the subpoena? Yes. And at this time, are you prepared to turn those documents over to me? No, there's no documents in here. Will you just answer the question, Mr. Merrill? Yes. Are you going to turn the documents in that file folder over to me now? No. You see what happened? Do you see the confession that came from him? He's showing on the record through craft and deceit that Mr. Merrill is there with documents and records that have been subpoenaed by the court. And that Mr. Merrill is saying, no, I'm not going to give them to you. No, I'm not going to turn them over to you. But don't you remember a little earlier what I told you was in here? I told you that Mr. Merrill had some letters from this ASCAP, and he had some clippings, and he had some papers in there. What is a document? You see, the word document in this case is absolutely crucial. The subpoena said receipts, records, payroll journals, check ledgers, canceled checks. Those are the documents that were subpoenaed. And so this crafty ass, this wily snake called a lawyer, gets this man, this citizen, who does not have a good grasp of the English language, but who said, yes, I understand the English language. Yes, I read and write. Yes, I went to high school. Yes, I understand what's happening here today. And this crafty, wily fox or wolf in sheep's clothing then says, are you going to refuse to continue to turn those documents over to me? Yes. You see what they're doing to you, friend? And they'll continue to do that to you. Now you're going to say, well, what's this got to do with the doctrine of the separation of powers? If you've heard the words, the doctrine of the separation of powers, you thought that all powers means that the Supreme Court and the Congress and the White House are the three branches of government, and those three branches of government represent the doctrine of the separation of powers. And I contend that's baloney. Absolute baloney. The doctrine of the separation of powers goes much deeper than just the three major branches of government. Because there's 5 divisions of power, not 3. That God is number 1. There's a division of power between God and man then divides the power through the Constitution to the government. Man, the sovereign citizen, you and I and anybody else is absolute sovereign paramount over those 3 branches of government called the Congress, the White House, and the Supreme Court. The problem is that we don't know how to assert our power. And they're sure not going to tell you that over here in the government school. And here you're going into the courtrooms and you come out of these, well, I should finish that thought. You go into the courtroom and make the admission, yes, I'm literate. And yes, I understand the English language. You probably do not understand 5% of the English language, and you're walking into their trap by saying, yes, I understand the charges. Yes, I understand the willful intent. Yes, I give you permission. I'll bet you never looked up the word information or complaint or grand jury to find out what they mean. And I'll tell you what our problems are, friend. Every one of us has a basic problem, and it's called vanity, jealousy, lust, and greed. And I say that those are the 4 basic ingredients of human nature. Vanity. I don't want to admit that I'm illiterate. So when anybody asks you something, and you've probably had a conversation or two, you know, once in a while you'll talk to a man that's an authority on everything under the sun. I've talked to people that know everything about anything. You know, the conversation breaks down and gets just plain embarrassing, you know. You get to talking to this guy, and, oh, yes, I know all about Alaska, and I did this, and I did that, and panned gold, and done this, and, you know, they're just going on and on. Well, I'm not an authority on Alaska. I traveled through the state one time about 10 years ago or so. I flew an airplane across it and flew it back. What I know about Alaska, you could put in a thimble and lose it in the bottom. That's my contention. But yet I've talked to people that'll sit there and lie and tell stories and rant and rave and just go on, and you know that what they're telling you is nothing but a lie. Well, remember the 5 separations of powers then come down to this. And I'm contending that there's 5 separations of powers, not 3. That you've got God, man, Constitution, government, and bureaucrat. And the bureaucrat's right down on the bottom. He's the slave. Now, who's this bureaucrat in this courtroom looking at me, the sovereign citizen? I'm at least second in command. I don't claim to be higher than God, but I'm at least second in command as the sovereign citizen. And here's this phony baloney coming in here, like he did to Orson, and saying, you'll raise your right hand and you'll swear this oath. Oh, got news for you, dummy. I'm not only not going to swear the oath, we're not even going to tell you the information that you want. We have constitutional rights. We have a Supreme Court that we have instituted in Washington, and they administer the contract. And when you don't deliver alfalfa, we are going to penalize you. And do you know that we citizens haven't been penalizing these guys? We contract for alfalfa, and they bring us moldy grass. We contract to have it delivered on the 24th of July, and sometimes they don't even bring the stuff. And then they turn around and tax us and tell us that we're not going to pay $10,000, you're going to pay $14,000. And we just dutifully pay and pay and pay, and we never seem to complain. Or if we do complain, who do we complain to? Don't we write letters to the statesmen? Don't we write letters to our congressmen? Don't we write letters to our legislators? Don't we write letters to President Reagan? Redress of grievance, friend, comes on the courtroom floor when you stake out that 9 square feet. And you tell them, I'm the belligerent claimant and I'm here in person, and you better listen to me because I'm number 2. When we're talking about rights, when we're talking about powers, we're talking about the sovereign citizen, and I'm him. Now let's go on to the 3rd branch then. I'm contending that number 1's God, number 2 is me. Now I'm willing to talk to you about who's number 3 in the scenario. Well, I'm contending that my Constitution is number 3 in the scenario, and that this is my master contract. Well, now, who's number 4 then? Well, now let's talk about government. Now let's talk about this thing called the legislative, the executive, and the judicial powers of government.